webinar, that it means that most of you aren't appearing on camera, so that's probably doesn't create any challenges for you. We would like you to introduce yourselves in the chat, though. It'd be nice to know who we're joined by, and to be active throughout the call as well, because I'm sure, and I know in the amongst the attendees, we also have some experts and practitioners in this area, so we would like to involve you as we go along. If you do want to speak at any point during the discussion section, you will need to raise your hand, and then we can bring you into the call. There's also the opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A function as well. So as I mentioned, this is a sort of joint webinar of Open Algorithms Network and the Europe Dialogue series. So the Europe Dialogue series is a series of webinars designed for the European open government community, really trying to connect sort of some EU and wider European regional policy priorities with OGP national processes and stakeholders. So it's a new series, an occasional series, informal, but hopefully useful. And the idea is really to kind of help make a better connection between all of the dialogue processes and the collaboration between governments and civil society that are happening across Europe in national processes. And ultimately, we'd love to see these things, these discussions feeding into OGP commitments in national action plans. So today, a really crucial issue for our times, the use of algorithms and AI is never far from the headlines. And governments and businesses are clamoring to harness the benefits of AI in terms of greater efficiency, time and money savings, advancing innovations and scientific discoveries. But we also know the risks alongside that, and that if AI use is rolled out without sufficient safeguards, the risk of undermining fundamental human rights and being used for malign purposes as well are real. So the connection with open government is hopefully obvious and pressing as well as the pace of AI adoption speeds up. So a very pertinent theme for us. Within OGP, we're seeing more and more commitments in this area, and digital governance and AI in particular is one of the themes within our Open Gov Challenge initiative. So we have had some submissions, like we have one from Italy, for example, within Europe on public engagement around AI use. But we'd love to see more. And so hopefully this webinar can serve as some kind of inspiration, whether you're from government or civil society, to introduce this topic more into your national or local OGP process at whatever stage it's at. So I think that's all is needed from me by way of introduction, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah now.
Sure. So actually, one logistical point I think we missed is that we have live translation or interpretation in this meeting. And I'm going to share really quickly my screen so that you can see how we do this. You can scan the QR code here, choose your language, and then click attend. And then you'll be able to see live captioning if your primary language is not English. I'll also drop a link in the chat to how you can do this as well. All right. That's the last logistical point. And otherwise, thank you very much, Paul, for introducing us. And thank you for everyone for joining today. Like Paul said, it's a very integral topic that we're working on here at OGP. We're hosting this meeting as obviously part of the European Dialogue series, but we're also linking it to OGP's Open Algorithms Network. The Open Algorithms Network is a peer community of practice for government officials seeking to make algorithms used in public decision-making more transparent, accountable, and trustworthy. OGP coordinates this network and it brings together countries, so civil servants from countries that are leading on open governance in AI policy, including the UK and France, Canada, Estonia, Uruguay, countries from all over the world. The network usually holds closed-door peer learning sessions, and most recently, last week, we held a peer learning session discussing the common challenges in the implementation of these algorithm transparency registers. So today, in this open door, broader session, I'm very pleased to be discussing the same topic, just in a broader context, sharing some of the network's learnings with a broader audience. So I know we have a few members of the network in attendance. Please feel free to share your experience in the chat and reflections on the topic as well. Okay, so we're going to kick things off with a little bit of audience participation here. I have a poll to start. Ready? Here we go. So the first question, do you feel that you have a good understanding of when your government uses automated systems to provide services to citizens? And I have some options here. So either definitely-ish or I have no idea, absolutely not. And we can do all three questions at the same time. Oh, good. The first answer is absolutely not. Well, this is what we're working to change. The second question, how would you rate your understanding of what an algorithm register is? I know before I started working on these, I'd never heard of them. And number three, have you ever actually used an algorithm register, either as a citizen or in the course of your work? I think, especially as a citizen, even if I knew my government had an algorithm register, I might just be happy about that fact and not ever go to look at it. Um, so we're just curious what the balance here in our audience is today. Okay. All right. The answers have stopped coming in, so I'm going to end the poll and we can look at the results. So no one has a good understanding of when their government uses automated systems to provide citizens. Oh, well, we have some work to do. I'm glad to see that ish at least has 63% of the votes here. I mean, the shows that we're making progress. We're getting there, right? And on question two, good. Okay, so this webinar is mostly targeting those of you who are not experts. And I'm guessing that the two experts are the ones that we've invited to speak about their experience on the UK algorithm register that you'll hear from later. And number three, okay, about 30-60. But like I said, personally, I don't think I would have ever looked at one before I'd started working on it from a citizen's perspective. So you're not unique in this. And great, definitely, that we have 30% of folks who said that they've looked at a register before. During the course of the webinar, Swazik will be showing some screenshots and show some use cases of what they look like. And I would encourage you to actually go to the websites and look at the register online as well afterwards, because it's quite interesting, really, how they work. Okay, so then to kick us off and tell us start off this information sharing, we have Tai Young-Panish with us. Tai is the Director of Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships at Political Watch, which is the CSO in Spain. And more for today's role, she also leads the CSO coalition called IA Ciudadana that works to defend human rights in the digital world. So Tai, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for inviting us. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it works. Okay. Sorry, get stuck here. Okay, now?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so thank you. So maybe before we start with the report and everything, it's for us important to explain who we are, no? Who is IA Ciudadana coalition, no? Okay, IA Ciudadana it's the first coalition of its kind in Europe. We are 17 organizations working from labor rights, racial justice, democracy, social justice, digital rights, consumer rights, democracy. So it's a really diverse coalition of this kind. And our main goal is to improve public participation in the governance of artificial intelligence, ensuring that the AI system serves the public good, respect fundamental rights, and remain subject to democratic oversight. And we are working through three key pillars. And one is generating knowledge to inform better policies and practices. The second one is advocacy to influence policymakers and public institutions, and raising awareness on the social impact of AI. And we do all of this through a network collaboration and working closely with other organizations and entities in Spain and across Europe. No? And currently we have three working groups. The first one is it's on public algorithm registers and public participation, and it's the report that we're going to share with all of you and have a interesting conversation. The second working group is on fundamental rights impact assessment, and in the coming months we are going to publish a report on impactful public participation on fundamental rights impact assessment and effective transparency mechanisms for their oversight and enforcement. And the third working group is on AI and public space. And at the end of the year, we are going to launch another report on this, no? But regarding the topic that we are going to discuss today, we would like to say that for us, algorithm transparency is a key issue on the coalition, because transparency it's not just a technical issue; it's a democratic requirement. No? And as a principle, algorithm transparency is grounded in the right to know and access information. No? But beyond the transparency, it's a right. It's also a tool for achieving broader democratic goals, no, especially on public participation. And because it allow us the protection of fundamental rights by allowing harmful or discriminatory systems to be identified and challenged, democratic participation by fueling public debate with accessible information, and government accountability. No, and as the other Lovelace Institute arc, that we need a meaningful transparency, that because transparency that strengthens democratic checks and balance and actively invites the public engagement in the decision maker. No, and so transparency is just the beginning. No, the idea with this rep was that we want to contribute to have a broader conversation, and by exploring how transparency can help us to frame a meaningful public participation and democratic control over the AI systems that are shaping our lives. No, so that's the idea today. I think it's going to be a rich conversation with all of you, and I'm going to pass the floor to David, who is part of the coalition too. So David, I'm going to stop the presentation so you can follow it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thanks, Ty, and thanks everybody for coming this morning. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think you're seeing my slides now. Are you? No. Yes. Okay, because
No.
I only see Ty on the screen. Yes. So hi, I'm David Cabo or David Cabo. I'm the director of Cibio. We are a non-profit newsroom based in Spain. We do investigative journalism and advocacy to try to improve the transparency and accountability of Spanish public administrations. And we are part of this coalition, IA Ciudadana, but I wanted to start by explaining why we got involved with all this AI stuff, all this algorithm transparency, which wasn't part of our original plan. I mean, we are not a digital rights organization. We do a standard old school transparency work. But I wanted to explain how we got into this. Back in 2018, which is 7 years already, it's a long time. As part of our work, we report on government decisions. My colleague and co-director, a journalist, Eva Belmonte, she reads the official gazette every morning to find important decisions and explain them to citizens. We got very concerned because there was a new system of subsidies for vulnerable
David?
people or poor.
David, can I
Sorry?
interrupt you quick? Can you try
Yeah.
and stop sharing your screen and then share it again so we can see?
Oh, you're not seeing my. Oh, wait.
I don't think it loaded properly.
Okay. What about now? No?
Nope.
No, it's still only
No.
loading, I think.
But I'm happy. I can also share, David, if you want me to
Ah,
share your
let me-
slides
yeah, let me try.
as you keep talking.
What about this?
Yes.
Now.
Okay, good. Yeah, so as I was saying, yeah, as part of our work, we were explaining people, we were telling people that there was a new system for subsidies for low-income people to get a subsidy in their electricity bill. And the big issue was that basically many millions of people were not applying, even if they have the right to apply for this. They were gonna lose their all benefits because there was a change in the system. They had to reapply, and basically like a month before the deadline was over, like half of the people had not applied for this, right? So this is part of our normal work. We do this public service journalism, trying to help people get their benefits and things like this. So we started doing a campaign about this, and we started to inform people. And the problem was that wait, why cannot here. The problem was that the process was quite complicated. The form they had to fill was complicated. I mean, in theory, the system was very simple. Either if you were low income or you had certain types of pensions, you could get the benefit. But in reality, the form was very confusing, and also you couldn't just go to a government office and ask for it, because you had to ask your electricity company, but only some electricity companies, and then the electricity companies would have to check all your data and would check your income, and then they would give you the benefit, so not the government. So it was all set up in a very confusing and complicated way. And also, and this is actually a good thing, I will explain later, because the electricity companies cannot check your income, the government had set up a system called Bosco, where the electricity companies would put your data, and Bosco would check your income and your status, your social security status and all that stuff. And then Bosco would reply with the decision, right? So there was this automated system right in the middle, because the government had set up this complex process. So since we do this public service stuff, we created an online assistant to help people know if they had the right or not, and also to help them generate the PDF that they had to submit to the electricity company. And we did this together with the market regulator. We did a big campaign. We had so I think eventually we got up to a million people use the online assistant, and it was very helpful for them, because it generated all the documentation they needed to do to give it to the electricity company. But the important thing for us today is that there were kind of edge cases or confusing cases in the description of the law, which was there was this royal decree explaining in which cases you could apply for this. And most of the time it was clear, but there were some edge cases that were not totally clear for us. So we wonder, like, okay, but then how is the government doing this? Even the lawyers from the market regulator were not 100% sure how to understand the law in some of these edge cases. So then we did what we do as journalists. We submitted an access to information request, a freedom of information request, asking for the technical documentation of this tool, Bosco. We wanted to know how it was done, so we asked for the technical documents, which gave us like a high-level description of the logic that they had implemented and how it was built and all that stuff, which was good. But most importantly, we also asked for the test cases. I mean, we asked what exactly have you check in order to deploy this tool. And then they gave us this spreadsheet with different scenarios that they had tested with different income values and things like that. And there we found that there were at least two mistakes. I won't go into details because it's not the point, but just a high level, basically, like if you were a pensioner with certain type of pensions, like a widow, and then at the top of the form you said, yes, I am a pensioner, then you wouldn't get the benefit, because widows were not supposed to get this, but only if they were low income. Basically, it's messy, because the way it was set up, it was very messy. But basically, in some cases, the tool would reply saying, no, you don't have the right to this benefit, even if the person actually did have the benefit, just because they clicked the wrong check in the form, right? Even if the system knew that actually based on the income they would get the tool. So the government said that they would fix it and blah 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 blah, and they were supposed to fix it, but we're not 100% sure. We are not 100% sure because actually the fight continues, because we asked for the source code, and that we didn't get. We wanted to check whether there was more problems in the code, and we are now at the Supreme Court level, but that's a story for another day. I won't go into details unless you want to talk about it later. But the point is that for us, this was a critical moment, because that's when we started working in all this algorithmic transparency stuff. And for us, the point is, Bosco is unusual because it had to be made public and official. It was described in official documents because it was made available to third parties, to electricity companies. But normally, if all this was done internally by the government, we would have never known that there was an automated decision making system working, right? The government would have developed this and would have automated this without telling anyone. And in the letters you get with a response on your claim, it doesn't say anywhere that this is an automated decision. So we were lucky in a way that because of the process, we could know about Bosco, but normally we wouldn't know. So as part of our journalism work, we, for the last year and a half, we've been trying to find other systems. And we found other systems in Spain making this type of decisions. For example, in jails, or maybe even the police is doing some of this stuff. But the problem is we have to rely on press releases or a politician talking, and they only talk about the cool stuff, and they only talk, and they also want to look very innovative. So they say that it's artificial intelligence when even if it's not artificial intelligence, that is very vague. No one really knows what artificial intelligence means. So we cannot rely on this. We also tried looking at the procurement contracts, but that's not reliable either, because sometimes like the government would hire a big number of hours from a consultancy company, but it doesn't say exactly what for, or maybe it develops this thing internally. So and also we tried asking the government directly using access to information requests. The problem is that there is at the moment, no one is keeping track of which AI systems are in place. Also because there is no clear definition of AI. So even if we ask ministries which systems they have, the responses are not complete, or they say that they don't know. I mean, it's not. It's basically impossible at the moment to know what's going on in Spain inside the public administrations. So the idea we are pushing through with the IA Ciudadana is to have a national algorithm register. So some of you already know what this is, so I'll be very brief. I mean, Swasik talking next after me, she's the one who knows better and the expert. But basically what we want is a centralized list of automated systems used by public administrations. So I mean, it should be freely available. You don't have to register. You don't have to ask for it. It contains structured data on who's using it, why, and which decisions it's making based on which data. And now Cecic will explain better which fields we think are critical. Now, very importantly, it's not just for AI, because that's a high bar. I mean, many of the systems like Bosco that are making these decisions are not really machine learning, very sophisticated. I mean, they apply certain rules, but they still make critical decisions that impact human rights and impact citizens. So the register should include this. And it's a critical first step for people like us, journalists, civil society organizations, other researchers, because then we can find out which systems are in place, and then we can start asking about them through freedom of information, or we can do work on that. And why now? And this is my final slide. I mean, in the report that Shasik is gonna show and explain, we tell governments that this is a good time to do it, because even if the AI Act doesn't mandate having a national register, it mandates, or it requires setting up certain processes and procedures for monitoring, reporting, enforcement. So we think it's a good time, since governments need to set up this infrastructure and need to look into this and keep track of things for critical infrastructure, for example. I mean, that's a great opportunity to actually go a bit farther and keep track of all the algorithms that they are using. And I think I'm in time. Yes. So that's it from me. Swasik, if you want to take it over now.
Sure. Thank you, David. I will also share my screen. Someone else's. Oh, if you stop sharing, David, I will be able to share myself. Thank you. Perfect. Great. So I will take it from here. Hi, everyone. My name is Swazik, and I am a researcher and consultant on data rights, digital rights, and AI policy. And I had the real pleasure of writing this report for IA Ciudadana alongside David, and some other people who are present here. So Tai and David set the stage for what we were trying to achieve with this report. But basically, we started by asking the question, okay, there is an opportunity around the AI Act's creation of a database of high-risk systems. And the report dives a little bit more into the requirements of the AI Act's database. And if you have any questions, we can also look into them. So there is an opportunity. There is also a real need from different actors to know about these systems. What can we learn from what's being implemented right now, working, and what should be done so that these registers are actually useful? And how do we think about national registers in complement or in parallel with this opportunity of the AI Act? And so we conducted interviews and desk research from around August to December 2024. And this is what the report is based on. All right. So what's happening right now with registers in Europe? There is some really good resources on registers around the world. We can share some links that we built on, but our research was really focused on Europe. What's interesting is that registers have momentum. So they are one of the most active or the fastest growing algorithmic accountability policy tools in Europe. And we inventoried 34 registers, some of them led by outside government, so by civil society organizations or members of the opposition, but 27 led by governments at national level, supranational level, like the EU central agencies, but also local governments. I also want to point out that we made a database of these registers, and they are also in the Civic Tech Field Guide, which is a website. In case you want to check it out, we were able to share the data with them. Okay, so we have 34 registers in Europe, 27 are government-led, which is a huge step from 2020 when there was 2, Amsterdam and Helsinki, and it made headlines. What we can say as well, however, is that they are concentrated in a handful of countries. The Netherlands and France are very active, especially because a few local governments have taken up this opportunity. So active, but still concentrated in certain places. And the other thing is that even though they're their infancy. And so what we notice is that they lack both standardization and evaluation. When I say they lack standardization, let me check if something is happening. Oh, perfect, Sarah is sharing the links. When I say they lack standardization, this is in practice what algorithm registers can look like. For instance, so you see on the top left, this is the register of the Scottish government, which is an interactive website, a web page of its own. On the bottom right, you see the algorithm register of the city of Antibes in France, which is an Excel spreadsheet that you can download. So like very different formats, very different information that's being shared, very different levels of accessibility. The report goes into all of this, so I won't spend too much time, but I'm happy to share some insights during the Q&A. So what we did try to do though, and then in terms of evaluation, what I was mentioning is that through interviews with people within government teams who were working on these registers, we've realized that even for those who were created a few years ago, the results on whether these registers have actually tangibly helped transparency and then accountability and were helpful to journalists, helpful to civil society organizations, or even to regulators, the evidence is still scarce and is not necessarily tracked precisely because governments are still focusing on populating the registers. So this is a caveat in terms of good practices, even though we're fairly confident that our recommendations are relevant and will lead to good results. One can only encourage like implementation assessments to be done because that's still something that's lacking. And so also if you're a researcher and you want to work on that, there's only a handful of evaluations of registers. All right, that being said, what we wanted to focus on today was on good practices and different practices that we see in existing registers through case studies, and also maybe practices we would like to see more. Before we dive in, David already mentioned this quickly, but I wanted to give a brief overview of what we recommend, or at least what we've noticed is included in registers. And this is based both on registers that exist, but also academic and policy literature on what it should be. And as you can see, the technical aspect of things, so documenting even the source code or models and data for the more complex models, is not the only thing that you can document. And we really emphasize that if we document the system as a whole, meaning, you know, the policy context, the funding, the decision-making process in which the algorithm is integrated, as David was mentioning before, you know, not just Bosco, but the whole system, and then data on evaluation and impact assessments, and also details on appeal mechanisms, rollback measures, participation during the design and implementation of the tool. These are all information that are useful to have to guarantee and push for accountability. So the main message is transparency is not only technical, there's many other things that can and should be recorded. All right. The report makes, okay, my internet went up, but now it's back. The report makes 12 recommendations across 4 dimensions, which are process and governance, scope, accessibility and usability, and implementation. That's a lot of recommendations. All of them are good, so I recommend looking into all of them, but I'm going to emphasize specific ones today through case studies. All right. The first algorithm registers I wanted to highlight was the algorithm register of the Dutch government. We have longer detailed case studies in the report. The algorithm register of the Dutch government was started in 2022, and it's so far the most populated out of all registers in Europe, with almost 1,000 algorithms. And every week I check it and it keeps growing. So that's very, very impressive. You can find it on the link I included in the slides, and then we can share all the links after the presentation. Several things to mention about this register. The first one, in terms of process, it's that it's a central register. And this is really one of our main recommendations, as David mentioned. And we can see that here it's very convenient to have all algorithm registers registered in one place. And so that the documentation is coordinated. The register is also easy to find. It's a website. So that's something that is to highlight in terms of this register. The second thing is that it also registers rule-based systems, as David mentioned. That is something that is very important, and something that is also shared by a lot of different registers that we've surveyed. I put 2 examples here, but rule-based systems, as David mentioned, are systems that are relatively simple based on rules. And this is something that the AI Act database will not focus on completely, because there are, like, the definition of AI in the AI Act is a little bit potentially narrower. There's still debates, and we're pushing for a broad definition. But just so you know, a lot of the registers, existing registers at national level in Europe, go beyond the AI Act. We can also keep making the case for rule-based systems being recorded in these registers, but David has already made the case, so I won't go too much into it. The other thing that's interesting in this in the algorithm register of the Dutch government is that it registers all algorithms publicly, and by that I mean we can contrast it with the AI Act database's approach of putting specific algorithms, namely those used in law enforcement, immigration, border control, and asylum processes, in a private part of the database, which means that we won't have access to these algorithms. And in contrast, the Dutch register really pushes to register all algorithms publicly, even if that means sharing less information about some systems that are critical, at least, you know, indicate that they're used. And here you can see, if you type in law enforcement, migration, fraud, you find several systems. because sometimes, registering the system and letting people know that it exists is already very good information. The third thing is that this register is really envisioned and approached as a complement to the AI Act database. And this is shown by the different tags that agencies can use to register their algorithm. You can see that one of the tag is high-risk AI system. And I'm happy to go back to what a high-risk AI system is in the AI Act. But this is the AI Act requirement for the European database, which means that the Dutch government, when the obligation enters into force in August 2026, will already be able to streamline this process. However, they also record other algorithms, namely also what they call impactful algorithms, which is any system that has direct legal consequences for data subjects, influences a selection for inspection or control, but also algorithms that influence how the government classifies a data subject or group. So basically, they take into account the definition of high-risk AI systems and the scope of high-risk AI systems, but they broaden the scope of their national register. And that's also something that was very interesting to see those thought of together. There's other cool features that I don't have time to go into, and dimensions. I mentioned them here. There's many more in the report, but all of these pertain to other recommendations that we've highlighted in the report. The next example, and I know we have some people from that team here, so I think they will be better equipped than me to answer questions, but I also wanted to highlight the register of the United Kingdom called Algorithmic Transparency Reporting Standard, and then they have a hub, which is the repository of algorithms, which at the time of writing the report had 9 algorithms recorded, but now has 72, which is a lot more. So that's also very nice to see. And again, as you can see here, the register is central, so it's centralized. It's also mandatory. At the time of writing the report, there was an announcement that the register would be mandatory. The legal statutes weren't ready yet, but this is maybe something that the team will want to speak on. And making the register mandatory is something we really push for, just because we've seen that in countries where it is mandatory, it's an easier incentive than having to convince agencies to do it without any mandatory requirement. Even though it's not enough, it is still very helpful. There's also other things in that register which are interesting. The register has undergone a lot of iterations with public engagement processes, which we go more into detail in the report. The other thing I wanted to highlight here very quickly was, in terms of implementation, the ATRS team provides guidance for public bodies to help them fill in the register. And they have a whole section on algorithms which may present challenges in terms of transparency, either because they offer risks for gaming the system, cybersecurity risks, intellectual property risks. And so the guidance is very detailed and gives you really interesting arguments to understand what you can do with systems that you may find critical, but that you still want to document. And then the whole guidance is very detailed and something that is what we thought very good practice. There's also other very interesting things, to name a few, in the implementation, which has been underway for a while now. Every agency is now required to have a single point of contact to help to liaise with the ATRS team, which has been found to be helpful in implementation. It's also a register which has extremely detailed technical documentation that is trying to match what technical teams have to document. So in terms of process, it's also helpful to help it streamline throughout the product development process. And then in terms of accessibility, there's a lot of things that have been done to make the information accessible to non-experts, backed by some public engagement studies. There's a lot more in the report, but I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we can go back to it in the Q&A. Two very quick examples I also wanted to highlight that can be of inspiration and tie into our recommendations. The first one is the French Digital Republic Act, which introduced in 2016 different obligations for agencies using automated decision-making systems in terms of transparency. And one of them is a decentralized approach to registers where each agency has to document the algorithm it uses on its website. The decentralized approach is something to look into. Here, really, the point that is interesting is the fact that there are legal obligations. This is also the case in Finland, if I'm not mistaken, and something we don't highlight in the report, but that is still interesting to look into. And so these are arguments that some countries have done this, and that legal obligations have shown to be at least one of the reasons why agencies really start to look into this topic. Last example would be the Scottish AI register. There's many cool things to mention about this, many good practices. I have to stop saying cool things, it's not professional, good practices. But what I mean by that is one thing to highlight, because I'm almost out of time, and that's interesting, is that the Scottish AI register has really been thought as a tool for governance beyond transparency. And for IA Ciudadana, of course, the end goal is transparency and accountability. But we know that for agencies, sometimes they need different incentives. And so the Scottish team really thought of this as a tool to help and support the teams. And that makes it a little bit easier to implement and think about in a context where a lot of the teams are strained in terms of resources. There is a lot more in the report. I wanted to also stress collaboration with civil society. I'm out of time, but this is something that is still lacking a little bit in terms of existing registers, even though some have done public engagement activities. But we really go into detail in the report about how civil society can be better involved throughout the implementation of the register and what algorithms to prioritize and document, and also what the information presented, how helpful it is, and to help review it. This hasn't been done, and we know it's difficult for agencies and governments to implement that. But I thought it's important to stress it again, because without participation and collaboration with civil society, we risk missing the mark on how effective these registers are going to be. In conclusion, this is the complete list of recommendations. We went into some of them. There are others that you can read more about in the report, and I'm happy to go over any of them during the Q&A. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Swazik. That was very interesting. And I also love that I heard a few overlaps from what we talked about in the Open Algorithms Network last week. So I think we've all learned something from both of these events. Right now, we're going to have a quick input from the UK team that actually works on implementing the algorithm register. So we have Sarah Handyside, who I'm going to add, and Elena Hasranga, yeah, who might also join a bit. So we've asked them to kind of give an input on something that might have been challenging, something that they're proud of, expand a bit on what Swazik said, and really just give the government civil service perspective rather than the CSO or academic perspective on these transparency registers. So go ahead.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Is this working? I'm not used to this platform. Is that okay? Perfect. Yeah. Wonderful. Sorry, and I apologize for any kind of background noise as well. There was a pneumatic drill outside just before, which seems to have stopped. But yeah, thank you so much for all of that and for your really generous words. So it was really interesting to see how our work kind of lines up against the other registers that you've looked at in the report. So I think a few comments to make, which hopefully resonate with what you were saying. Really, the driving force behind the ATRS project in the UK was generating trust in public sector uses of algorithmic tools. And we've always used that language, algorithmic tools, to try and be broader than just AI, which was perhaps the fashion at the time, and possibly still now, and to really get people thinking about the operational context in which tools are deployed. And I would really encourage people to look at the scope and exemptions policy for the ATRS, which is available on gov.uk. It's a publicly available document, and really goes into more detail around scope, because I think you asked about challenges, and I think one of the things that's been most interesting, I'll use the word interesting, for us throughout this work has been when you are mandating an algorithmic transparency requirement, which is what we've done in the UK. It's mandatory as a policy mandate rather than a legislative mandate, which I can also talk about. But one of the challenges for us was thinking about where you draw the boundaries of that mandate, both in terms of the organisations that you're dealing with and in terms of the algorithmic tools or the algorithms that you're interested in. And where we landed, and as I say, this is this. Oh, sorry, I think I've now appeared on video. Maybe people can see me now. Perfect. Hello. Yeah, so the scope and exemptions policy for the ATRS sets out the organisations and the tools for which the ATRS is mandatory. We do welcome records for tools and organisations outside of that scope, and have published some that would not sort of technically be considered mandatory. But the mandatory requirement applies to central government, which in the UK we've defined as meaning both the central departments, so the big departments that everyone knows about, but also arm's length bodies, meaning executive agencies and non-departmental public bodies, which either deliver frontline services or interacting directly with the general public. So those are the organisations in scope. And then in terms of tools in scope, we set this as being mandatory for algorithmic tools which either interact directly with the public, which is an easier piece to understand. That's generally means sort of chatbots on government websites and things like that. But the other bucket, if you will, is algorithmic tools which have a significant influence on a decision-making process with public effect. A lot of consultation with lawyers and policy experts in government to try and refine that language. And so what we're trying to do with that is to get organisations to think about how algorithmic tools are embedded in or informing decision-making processes that affect individuals. And what we were trying to do was say, look, you might be using a tool that is actually a very simple rules-based algorithm, but which is nevertheless part of a high-impact decision about citizens. So whether you're entitled to a particular program of benefits, for example, or whether or not you get a visa that you've applied for. And we would be very interested in publishing a record for that. On the other hand, you might have some macros embedded in a spreadsheet that's performing some really broad macro policy analysis, which sits several stages back from interaction with the public, and for which your department has thousands upon thousands of these. And we don't want to burden you with trying to complete a lengthy ATRS record for each of those, because that wasn't the sort of purpose of this work, again, thinking about public trust. And I think broadly, and Eleanor may have things to add to this, that scope is working well, although we are, of course, conscious that there's a certain amount of subjectivity built into that scope, and everyone on the call will know what kind of complexities that can raise. But yeah, would really be interested in others' thoughts on that. I think another piece that you mentioned, Swazi, was that the ATRS is a lengthy document. The template that people have to fill in is far longer than I think in some other contexts, which was also a very deliberate and considered decision. There's obviously a burden attached to completing a longer document, and it means that it takes longer to complete an ATRS template for tool owners than it would to complete something simpler. Which again is something that we have to manage as a policy team in terms of supporting people and guiding them through the completion of that template. But the policy landed on this longer document because of that piece about driving public trust. I'll also comment on the mandate. As I mentioned, this is a policy mandate, not a legislative requirement. I could talk at length about the sort of various governance processes that we had to go through in order to secure the policy mandate, but it's a little dry. Again, this is publicly available in blogs on gov.uk. I think the short answer is that to agree a policy mandate like that in the UK government, you will typically go up through a number of different governance mechanisms or governance boards, cross-government, up to a permanent secretary level and a ministerial level board or process, such as a right round, all of which we did. But to underline that it is not at this stage a legislative requirement. Over the course of the last year, we did receive amendments to the government's data bill, which very recently got royal assent. So some amendments which sought to put the ATRS on a legislative footing. And we also had a privates members bill in the UK House of Lords, also seeking to legislate for an algorithmic transparency standard. And government's position is that whilst that might be an option in the future, at this stage it's more appropriate to push the policy mandate as far as possible, to take what learnings we can from the process of government departments and the wider public sector completing these records, and then make a more informed decision further down the line as to whether legislation is necessary. Also pleased to see you commenting on the uplift in records that we've had. The number of published records sat at a frustratingly low level for a long time, but we're very pleased that progress over recent months has been much faster. We published 5 records yesterday, which took us to 72, and we expect to get over that 3-figure mark at some point fairly soon, which will be quite a nice milestone for the team. So yeah, momentum is certainly building, and can answer questions on that side of things as well. But Eleanor, I can see that your hand is raised, so we'll let you speak as well. And thanks so much for the invitation to be here.
Sorry, I'm getting a lot of pop-ups because I never use Zoom on this laptop. Thank you so much, Sarah. I don't think I have very much to add at all because you really covered a lot of bases here. Just wanted to say maybe on the point between legislating on this versus policy mandate. We've thought about this a lot, and putting something into law doesn't necessarily always mean everyone complies with it, because it's actually really hard to enforce. It's really hard to check because, like, you can say this is the scope, but then how do you actually know, like, which are the tools in those departments that like would fit that scope if that information isn't actually public yet, and people within the departments might not even know that, right? So it's not necessarily that just putting something into law immediately solves the problem. So what we decided is that we would go through a policy mandate first, because what we realized is that a key ingredient is kind of getting people on board across the civil service, like trying to communicate to departments why this matters, and like trying to communicate what algorithmic tools are in the first place, and what we consider algorithmic tools to be, and what we consider an impact to be. And if you start talking to people, they also start realizing, yes, this is important, because if this what we do impacts people in potentially harmful or negative ways, or even like positive ways, this is where it matters that we communicate about it. So I think what I would tell others that are like trying to set this work up is that it's really important to bring people across the public sector on board. And that's why, having worked with single points of contact, so leads within each of the departments to kind of champion this work within their departments, that's why we went through a number of different boards at different levels of seniority across the civil service to get all the departments to agree that this is actually a policy that makes sense, and not just from the center kind of mandated and be like, you have to comply with it, deal with it, but actually like working together collaboratively is important, because it is such a finicky and tricky thing. There isn't really a clear scope. There isn't something that's black or white, because like 90% of the tools are kind of on that like gray line of like, are they in scope or not? Like, do they have an impact on people or not? It's really hard if you get into the weeds of it and like talk to each team. So yeah, it's just like working collaboratively is important. Yeah, on that, that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, both to Sarah and Elena, for sharing those perspectives. Now we're going to switch to Q&A. So we have half an hour, which is plenty of time for all of the questions and maybe continuing the discussion a little bit on things that we didn't have a chance to get through. So I want to start with Laura's question in the chat, just because we also were just speaking about what an impactful algorithm is. So Laura wrote, in the case of the Dutch algorithm register, what is considered an impactful algorithm? She notices there's a difference, big difference in number between those algorithms and those categorized as high risk. So Swazik, but also maybe we can broaden the discussion of what does impact mean, also in the UK case as well.
Yeah, I can start, and to also say, as part of the research process, the desk guidance and definition we could find on every register. So I think this comes from the Dutch guidance, which is in Dutch, but that I translated into English. Anyways, so I'm going to pull it up again. As I was saying, the guidance mentions that an impactful system is an algorithmic system that has direct legal consequences for data subjects, influences the selection for inspection or control, which is a lot of the algorithms we've seen pop up in debates, and also algorithms that influence how the government classifies a data subject or group. That being said, after your question, Laura, I went to see what algorithms were classified as impactful and high risk in the Dutch register, and it's first of all, it's not indicated how they came to the conclusion that it was either high risk or impactful. And I was looking at it, and from just a quick analysis, too quick, of course, don't take my word for it, but it seems like some of the systems that are high risk may not necessarily be considered high risk under the AI Act, and some of the systems that are impactful may be considered high risk, which makes sense because the AI Act is still very young, and we actually don't know exactly which systems are going to be high risk or not. And so maybe the point that I want to make, 2 quick points. The first point is, in the report, we do try and list exactly what impactful or what choices drive prioritizing algorithms in different registers. But also, it's very interesting to see the way the Dutch agencies have analyzed different algorithms. And one use case I see for civil society right now, sorry, there's a bit of noise. One use case I see for civil society is go through these algorithms and identify which ones, for instance, should be classified as high risk, but are not classified as high risk, and to show maybe where we need to make the definition more precise, if that makes sense. So it's very helpful to have these classifications, even if they're still a little bit blurry. Thanks.
All right, Sarah, Anna, do you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this before. So the language in our policy is around significant influence on decision-making processes and public effect. And yeah, the policy that I mentioned tries to give a lot of contextual examples, because we're conscious that what we're asking people to do is, think about operational context. And one of the examples that we have in that policy is the idea that a transcription or sort of voice to text tool might be out of scope if it's just being used internally in a department to record kind of meetings between officials, but might be considered in scope, in mandatory scope, if it were being used, say, to transcribe interviews between a job seeker and someone working in a job centre, for example. So we have a few kind of contextual examples like that to try and get people to think about what's the operational context of the tool. And of course, we always underline that, even if your tool is outside of that mandatory scope, we're still very happy to publish a record for it. And we talk about things like material impact on people and so on. But yeah, I'll drop a link to the policy in the chat as well, which might be helpful.
Thank you. Okay, so for those participants that we still have, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak and ask your question out loud. Otherwise, you can put questions in the chat. Okay, maybe just to kick it off, I'm going to ask a question that I know people have opinions on, and it might be a dumb question, but we're going to do it anyways. So oftentimes when you talk about algorithmic transparency with folks who aren't so deeply dived into this world as we are, their first question is all about privacy and data privacy. So yeah, can you explain how governments should balance this transparency with concerns like privacy or national security or IP protection? And maybe in the UK case, how you've managed to do that with the transparency register. I don't know who wants to go first. Just unmute yourself and go for it.
Sure. So we work closely with lawyers in the Cabinet Office who are experts in the FOI Act and try to ensure that the scope and exemptions policy closely mirrors that, which and I'm not an FOI expert, but I think sort of broadly is, the FOI Act has spaced. If under the FOI Act you would neither confirm nor deny the existence of a particular tool, I think that would generally be for kind of quite high level national security reasons. Then we don't need to see a record for it for obvious reasons. But if under the terms of the FOI Act you would release limited information about a tool, then you should consider mirroring that in the same way within your ATRS record. And the fields in the ATRS template are sort of free text. They encourage the writing of a kind of narrative around how the tool is embedded in a broader operational process. And we sort of encourage people to recognize that you can tell that story and explain that narrative of how and why the tool is used without providing a level of detail that would compromise whether it's data privacy or indeed issues like gaming and so on. And I think earlier there was a sort of extract from the policy which explores that. So essentially we encourage people to think about what is a sort of limited amount of information that you could release, rather than just saying, well, we can't say anything about this, although there might be typically security reasons why that would be impossible. Eleanor?
Yeah, and I don't think any of the information, at least in our case, like really would kind of impact privacy concerns in any way, because all the information that we are collecting is really about the tool at a high level and how it's working in a context. So describing how the tool works rather than talking about any kind of individual level decision process. The only field, I think, where this might be relevant is where the owners of the tool, like the senior responsible owners, are supposed to like be identified. But we've actually kind of like basically in the guidance that we don't really want people to put their names there because it's not necessary. Like we ask teams to put kind of the team name and the role there, but not necessarily someone's personal name, because also in the civil service, people change their jobs so much that actually it's not that helpful because they might just move on a year later. And it's easier to kind of find the right person in the team. But yeah, otherwise, I don't think privacy is as much of a concern. People might disagree, but I think in our case, it's not really.
So Advika, Ty, do you have any thoughts on that from a broader, less specific perspective? Or should we move on?
Maybe I can you still hear me? Because my environment is a bit noisy. Okay, that's great. I think one thing I want to emphasize from a non-government perspective is that often privacy, but not only privacy, concerns around gaming the system when it's algorithms for control or concerns about intellectual property are maybe used by agencies to release less information than they could. I don't know if David can speak on that or agrees, but this is often an answer one might get when we use the freedom of information framework in our respective countries. And so this is also why we emphasize that, as Elena and Sarah mentioned, a lot of the time you can release a lot of information about the systems, and we try to push back against this narrative that transparency has to be a trade-off for these things. Especially, you know, a lot of people say, oh, GDPR, and then it's actually not related to GDPR at all. It's just a reluctance to share information. So that's a really good point to underline. And I think also, you know, even in the AI Act database, the limitation of not sharing any information publicly about migration system, police systems, policing systems is really problematic, because those are the most critical systems, and the most critical systems are usually the ones where all these exceptions are invoked. And so we should be really careful about outright refusing to communicate about those, just because otherwise registers honestly will lose a lot of their meaning, and a lot of the resources that we put into them may go to waste.
Snaps to that, correct. Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead, David.
Well, just very briefly, I mean, we face privacy or data protection as an excuse very often when we ask about other areas, but when we ask about algorithms in particular, the two main excuses we get are intellectual property and national security, even for systems that are not critical. So we are, I mean, I think in Spain we are quite behind the leading examples of the Netherlands or UK. So yeah, there is still a culture change needed in the administration in Spain, because as soon as you ask for any software systems, they are, oh no, you're gonna hack into my servers, no information, and this belongs to us. We don't have to share it.
Elena, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think so. I think the intellectual property one is an interesting one, because I mean, at least in our case, for the HRS, it's not really any of the fields asks for any kind of IP related information. Most of what we're asking is high level descriptions of a decision-making process, and how a tool is embedded in that decision-making process, and how a tool kind of provides outputs to aid a decision-making process, etc. Who is involved, who's responsible, etc. We're not asking for source code. We're not asking for kind of data sets to be disclosed if they can't. We say that it would be nice if they could be, if they're open, if there's no problem in doing so. But in order to understand how a system is impacting people, you don't really necessarily need to look at the source code, and it's something that, as part of an audit, maybe, you know, as part of a different process, might be relevant, but I don't think necessarily in order to communicate about the existence of tools. So what we write in our scope, in our policy, is that if people in the public sector get that pushback from suppliers, they should like question this and say that this information isn't really about kind of IP related content at all, and that there should be like a careful examination of what information can be supplied without those concerns. So yeah, in our case, not really an issue, I would say, as in not really, kind of IP shouldn't be an issue.
Thank you. Okay, Paul had a question.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to turn to the future a little bit and ask a question about, you know, the relatively short-term time horizon, say the next 1 to 2 years, and maybe we could get a comment from a sort of Europe regional perspective, and maybe also from a UK perspective about what's next. What are the most pressing needs in terms of the next stage of this evolution? Because there's lots of things that need done. There's lots of recommendations in the report, and so all of them do need done ultimately, but like what's most urgent? Is it about further qualitative development of these registers? Is it about quantity, about, you know, scaling up the number of entries in the registers and the compliance? Or is it also about what IA Ciudadana were pointing out in terms of going beyond transparency, collaboration with civil society, introduction of accountability mechanisms? All these things need done, of course, but I'm just wondering what do you think is most pressing, and also where might the opportunities be in the next 1 to 2 years? Obviously, I'm thinking about where OGP can help and where OGP kind of commitments could could come in. I also have in mind a little bit the kind of lessons learned from the sort of open data movement, and that was obviously a big thing in it continues to be a big thing in OGP, but I guess my kind of simplistic sense of kind of the early years of that was, an overt focus on the sort of quantity of data being put out into the public domain and less focus on the use of that. And I think it took some time for that to kind of come around to kind of thinking about, well, what does this all actually mean, and how do we actually put that into the hands of ordinary citizens and make it beneficial for them in their life? So, pretty broad question, but maybe a comment from the kind of regional perspective and one from the UK perspective would be helpful.
I'm happy to, I mean, this will be very kind of micro because it's kind of priorities of our work, but I'd say that, we are mid rolling out this mandate. And as you've seen from the rapid changes in number of records, we are still at the point of identifying things within our scope from across government and across arm's length bodies. And I think our sort of first priority is to shift from that kind of identification and come on, this is a new mandate that you need to comply with, through to a business as usual. It is just sort of a core part of your operations that when you buy or build or deploy something new, it's just a kind of core part of business as usual that you get in touch with us and send us your ATRS record. Equally, that when you decommission something, you let us know and we update the record accordingly. So there's more work for us to do to get to that kind of BAU point. I suppose on the buying point, something that we didn't mention, but Eleanor led a piece of work to embed the ATRS in basically digital and data spend control. So essentially a part of the procurement governance in government, meaning that when you ask for new budget for a tool that would fall within our scope, to get that money, you need to commit to publishing an ATRS record. So processes like that obviously take a little while to bed in. And I think we're looking forward to moving to more of a BAU place. And then I think there's a lot of interesting work that could be done around public awareness of these transparency measures, and how do you get more members of the public actually looking at and engaging with this material, although that feels a little further down the line. But yeah, that's a very UK-centric position. I'd be interested in the kind of broader thoughts as well.
Right, maybe from our approach, maybe from the coalition, of the things that we're seeing, and it's raised by David that it's a cultural shift. We are really far away from where Scotland or UK or Netherlands. So we are like, we need to really shift the cultural way of thinking of transparency and accountability and public participation from our government and from our politicians as well. So that's why we are working like with a holistic approach. It's like we don't only do advocacy trying to influence them. It's also because they were saying, okay, it's beyond the political claim. It's like we need like concrete evidence. No, it's say, okay, now we are doing this report. It's a technical report. It's a really specific. We have a clear example. It's that what we are asking is not something like super weird. It's there are other countries that are already doing these registers. So it's like we have done this. We are trying to meet with them. And so that's why this gathering and creating or generating knowledge, no, specific reports, and also about what Sarah was saying, it's like this raising awareness, not only about citizens but also about other organizations and the civil society organizations working from other approach. That the transparency is a key element for all our work when we talk about AI. No, that's what is. So we are trying this approach, but it's been hard. Let's say in that way, working with our and that's why with the report we have the big one, like the great report on that's done by Swazik, and it's a really technical one. But we also do a policy brief specific on the Spanish case with specific recommendations for the government and specific recommendations for the parliament. So we can understand. So it's like, okay, you can do this on the other thing. So there are so many things that they can start working on this. It's a political willing, but all this kind of like being part of LGP and being part with and working with other networks in other countries, it could help to bring this topic. No, one of the recommendations that we say is like to have like a collaborative, that they are being part of collaborative network of other countries doing this work. So it's not something from civil society. It's something that it's trending. It's something that we need to be there. We cannot be left behind on this algorithm transparency. But we are there. We are trying. We are pushing. Thank you.
Maybe very briefly, one thing I want to highlight is that in the context of the EU, in any case, this database of high-risk systems will have to exist by August 2026. And that implies that agencies and governments at a national level will need to identify the systems that they use and which ones are high risk or not. And as we, the poll showed at the beginning, no one knows what systems are used right now. And so the short answer to your question, Paul, is a lot of countries don't have a register yet and haven't done this work of listing the algorithms. And in a year's time, they will have to comply with EU obligations. So I think it's a very straightforward policy legal requirement that we should take into account. To your note on populating the register and quantity over quality, I actually gave a talk a few years ago with Natalia Domagala, former member of the Cabinet Office in the UK, and one of my colleagues when I was working at the French government on lessons learned from the open data movement for open algorithms, talking exactly about, let's not do quantity over quality. However, what we've seen is that the Dutch register has become more and more useful as more and more information was shared without necessarily assuming what information would be useful for civil society. And so I would say that populating the register is still important. Of course, prioritizing maybe more high impact algorithms, but that's not to say the bigger the better, but it is helpful to have a comprehensive overview of those systems. And so there is that part that's important. So yeah, one call to action, Ty mentioned it, just sharing good practices as well. Also on tools, how to make tools that are actually helpful for accountability is something that countries could share. Building the tools or sharing the tools. So yeah, some paths for ideas.
Just one small supplementary follow-up to clarify from my perspective. So the AI Act, I think as David said, doesn't mandate a national register, but it's sort of de facto, in order to meet the requirements of the Act, that would be the most logical thing to do. Is that right?
So what government have to do, either as deployers or providers of these tools, is list the systems and then register them at the European level. So they have to do the work at a national level anyways, even though the tool in itself is not necessarily, will not be maintained by them. But for us, it is a logical conclusion that you could have national registers that come as a complement to the EU database that by definition will be more restricted, but governments will just collect information about other systems anyway, so you might as well do it. But I don't want to make the law say what it doesn't say. So it doesn't say that you need to have a national register, except for there is an ambiguity about a very specific type of algorithm. But it seems logical and helpful to do it at a national level in this context, basically.
Thank you very much. Unless we have any other questions, I think Swazie's given her call to action. So I want to ask if David or Ty, you have any last call to actions before we start wrapping things up? Other than read the report, obviously.
You reading the report is good. And no, and if you are, I guess for us, I mean, we are trying to build some pressure to push the Spanish government to do this. We try to get this in the OGP plan. It's not in the OGP plan, even if it was prioritized in the co-creation workshops. So if you're a civil society organization thinking about doing this, let us know, because we are interested. We may end up building our own register to force the government's hand. So I don't know, if you're interested in doing, if you're working on this on the civil society in other countries in Europe, yes, let us know. We would love to know who you are.
Okay, thank you. So we have one last final poll. It should be easier than the first. Let me set it up. Okay. Do you feel that you have a better understanding of what an algorithm register is than you did an hour ago, hour and a half ago? I'm really hoping for 100% on absolutely. Oh, okay. Oh no, we have someone who said they're so confused.
If you're still confused, please reach out. We will give
Yeah.
you a private webinar for sure.
I will say there's also an open GovGuide chapter that touches on these registers as well and automatic decision making in general, which I can put the link in for a moment. But there are loads of resources, both on the OGP website, IA Ciudadana as well, I'm sure. But okay, good. All right, then with that, thank you all very much for coming. And I'm going to pass to Paul for some quick last wrap up OGP announcements.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I don't think I have a lot of announcements unless there's ones that I'm not aware of that I'm supposed to be making. But I just wanted to thank everybody, including Sarah, who did all the legwork in organizing this webinar. But thank you very much to the IA Ciudadana Coalition. Congratulations on a really useful report. We're delighted to have had the opportunity to share that with the OGP community. And I know that hopefully more people will be able to watch back the webinar as we'll put the recording online. Thank you very much to Elena and Sarah as well for your ongoing active engagement with the Open Algorithms Network and for coming along today. Great to hear more about the UK case. So I think we're done apart from a quick plug for the OGP Summit, which is, of course, a big upcoming opportunity to discuss this amongst other topics. And there will be both breakout sessions and high-level sessions on this theme. So as you see on the slide, we have opened registration. So please do register your participation. The summit is taking place in Vitoria-Gasteiz in Spain. The Spanish government are the co-hosts, along with Cielo Magno, who is our civil society co-chair. So we hope to see you there in October. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. But Sarah, is there anything else I was supposed to mention? No. Okay, great. You said announcements, so I wasn't sure if there was something I was forgetting. But okay, thank you to everybody and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.